As proven by events at the minute and events of the past, it seems as humans we amplify and cope with our experiences through media. And in my opinion, this has never been more prevalent than during the Vietnam War. As commonly mentioned by veterans of the event and the media surrounding it, the music and media during the Vietnam War helped and often influenced the mood of the soldiers on the ground during the conflict.
This one written by a man and wheel who wrote You've Lost That Love and Feeling, and we hope with your help it's made #2 in the charts. It's called We Gotta Get Out of This Groove.
Often considered by many veterans the song of Vietnam, We've Got to Get Out of This Place debuted to great success in 1965.
In this dirty old part of the city where the sun refused to shine.
As the Animals originated from England, these lines are mostly inspired by the British class of the 1960s, with the American listeners in Vietnam often taking them to be about similar things, as the working class would have to be drafted to fight these wars, generation after generation. The line, "There ain't no use in trying," being referential to how working class families will be born generation after generation and still have no hope of achieving the American dream or similar prospects in their respective countries. The following lines are further evidence for this theory, as they demonstrate the generational theory even further. The verb slaving is also very important, as it shows the men doing these jobs are paid very little and have very little consequence on the overall trajectory of the world. The song overall is about a desire to escape your prescribed fate and strike out for something better and grander. Despite being more about society, for obvious reasons, this is very impactful for the men on the ground during the Vietnam War, especially during the early years as the song was fresh on the charts. The song was very catchy and well known, with one veteran stating, when the chorus began, singing ability didn't matter, drunk or sober, everyone joined in as loud as they could. This shows the effect that the song had on morale during the war. Furthermore, the song represented a desire to move on to something better and get out of that place, which sadly 60,000 never would. Post-war, it has become no secret that ethnic minorities and the working class were mostly targeted by the draft for Vietnam, contrary to what the government stated at the time. The song is incredibly similar to We've Got to Get Out of This Place in that sense, but just from a more American perspective, so even more relatable to the men on the ground at the time. The first thing that made it so alluring to the ears of men on the ground was the catchy and bouncy guitar riff, which is fantastic and a true work of art. The term "fortunate son" is mostly inspired by the fact that the men drafted and sent to the war at the time involuntarily were often from lower working class backgrounds, and a fortunate son would be someone who was born into a wealthy family and would not have to face the draft or be forced to sign up in any way. Apart from its release date, the fact the song has never been associated with any other war, really, demonstrates that in Vietnam the draft was much more biased than it had been previously in any other war. The term "they point the cannon at you" is representative of how the American government would declare war and then face the men who had no part in making that decision to actually go and fight it. Along with the war and the politics of the time, the 1960s and 70s also saw a massive cultural shift in the American people. The movement, commonly referred to as the hippie movement, stood for peace and also a general good time in America. Of course, with these sentiments and also the general feeling of the American people at the time, they were strongly opposed to the Vietnam War, along with a large majority of the general public. In one case, nearly 40,000 people would gather outside the White House to protest the ongoing war in Vietnam. Many musicians would also agree with the movement and the general sentiment of stopping the war in Vietnam. This led them to release many tracks, some just protest chants, but many full fleshed out songs about their feelings towards the war.
There's something happening here, but what
For What It's Worth by Buffalo Springfield became the band's main and only major success in the States. In fact, the song is not actually written out of the Vietnam War, it is more about the feeling of the youth in America at that time, mostly the anti-loitering laws brought in during the late 60s. However, the song's genius and at times imprecise lyrics allowed it to be adopted by protesters during the Vietnam War era. When the writer of the song, Stephen Stills, was questioned about the song's origin, he stated, "I had something kicking around in my head. I wanted to write something about the kids who are on the line over in Southeast Asia, and that didn't have anything to do with the device of this mission, which is unravelling before our eyes." He would further go on to say that the officials decided to call out the riot police because there's 3,000 kids sort of standing out in the street. There's no looting, there's no nothing, it's everyone having a good time. The riot police being called out inspired the line, "There's a man with a gun over there telling me I've got to beware." This line was also applied by the men fighting the Vietnam War at the time, as it referenced guns which are commonly associated with war. According to Spotify, Paint It Black is the Rolling Stones' most popular hit of all time, and it was very popular with the men on the ground for multiple reasons. In music culture, the song is definitive, as it saw Keith Richards and Mick Jagger partner to write a song for the first time ever. The pair claimed the feeling the song is trying to emote is the feeling of loss, and how, in that one moment, insanity ensues, and a destructive nature is felt within the mind. The fact that the song is called Paint It Black as opposed to Paint It White or Paint It Red is that the colour black emotes feeling of destruction, as smoke is often black. The song is often claimed to have taken inspiration from a 1922 book, taking the excerpt "I have to turn my head until my darkness goes," referring to the novel's theme of worldwide destruction and desperation. The line, "No colour anymore, I want it to turn black," is interesting, as colour can often represent fun, and as previously mentioned, black in this case represents destruction, and that line is symbolic. There's no fun or creativity is to be had anymore, and destruction is to take over the world and everything we see. The feeling often emoted by loss or destruction. For the men on the ground, a song like this would probably help them to amplify and also cope with their own emotions at the time, as feelings of destruction were widespread, as this is obviously a war, which emotes such things. In a strange way, the song almost has elements of sadness to it. A trapped and demented soul, possibly destined for better things, but has been turned to the force of destruction and evil, possibly by the feeling of loss. For the Rolling Stones themselves, I imagine the song was probably quite a strong change of direction, as going from upbeat and classic hits like I Can't Get No Satisfaction to a dark and meaningful song like this one. Perhaps one of the most commonly associated songs with the Vietnam War, thanks to its appearance in Apocalypse Now, The End by The Doors is a harrowing tale about loss, destruction, at the end of the world. Perhaps a sick, acid-fueled construct, or the feelings of a shattered man after a harrowing battle, The End by The Doors is a truly dark and depressing tale, with elegant guitar riffs, which only barely elevate it from a true psychedelic nightmare. Years later, recounting the song in 1969, Jim Morrison explained, "Every time I hear that song, it means something else to me. I really don't know what I was trying to say. It just started out as a simple goodbye song, probably just to a girl, but I could see how it could be a goodbye to a kind of childhood. I don't really know. I think it's sufficiently complex and universal in its imagery that could be almost anything you want it to be." Myself, and I'm sure many others, may see it as not an end of a childhood or a relationship, but more realistically, an end of a world, the end of a life. The almost apocalyptic riffs and licks during this song may lead many to believe that the song is much more sinister than Morrison and the Doors originally let on. The almost psychotic and destructive instrumental near the end is very powerful, and it may have almost been a coping mechanism for the men on the ground at the time, who saw it as a way to relieve themselves of the actions they had committed during the conflict. sure myself and many others would see the ending verse of the song as almost the writer coming back down to earth after the actions they've committed, as implied by the instrumental. The deranged vocals and instrumentals throughout are very disturbing and mirror the feelings of the war. That is the end of today's video. Thank you so much for watching. If there's any songs you feel I've missed, as I was not able to cover all of them, as there are simply so many great songs from that area, but I just decided to cover the most influential ones and the ones I felt had the most meaning relevant to the war. So please like the video, subscribe to the channel, and please check out the Kickstarter with the link in the description. We only have about 1 day left. We are over the target, but it would be as great as it could possibly be if we could just get that bit more money to make the series just that much better. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.